Okay, I think I am live. Can you see me over there, dear? Hello, friends, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. If anybody out there just happened to randomly bump into this Twitch channel called Vladimir TV. If anyone can see me and hear me, can I get a verification in the chat room that this is actually working? I always like to do that first before I talk for 10 minutes to blankness. First time chatter from M. Waffer 3 says, yes, sir. Thank you for your first time chatter, Waffer. Or is it wafer? I don't know which way you want to go with that spelling. Well, that means we are live and online here on the Plaid Adventure Twitch channel. This is the online live office hour for World Regional Geography, a.k.a. World Regions, here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies. And tonight we can do what we usually do for office hours, which is chat about what's going on planet Earth. That's cool. There are a lot of news stories out there. However, I have also queued up a lecture that I promised from last week. So before I go any further, what's going on with you all? Is anybody here in the chat room with me? Would anybody like me to go ahead and launch into a lecture? Or perhaps are there some current events happening on planet Earth right now that maybe have garnered your attention today? Anyone? Anyone? Is there anything going on planet Earth that perhaps you heard about and perhaps would like to elaborate on? Okay, so I've only had one chatter, so there's only one chatter in the chat room, so I will just launch into... Oh, there we go. Hannah Scott's up in the hizzle with Spy Balloon. Spy Balloon is number one. And M. Waffer kicking back in with the earthquakes in Turkey. First time chatter from Unique 1621 that also says Chinese balloon. First time chatter from Maddie Van Over. Good name. Maddie Van Over, Spy Balloon. Ethan Owens up in the hizzle needs my opinion on the spy balloon. First time chatter from Ignatius. We all seem to be in agreement about spy balloon, I assume. First time chatter from Chief Butthole. Welcome, Chief. Thanks for your first time chatter and your screen name. First time chatter from Hokey Maine. I agree as well on Chinese balloon. Cubicle Seal back in the hizzle saying balloon. Wow, I would have actually thought that the death and destruction in Turkey would have perhaps been more on your mind. First time chatter from J-Tridy1, who also says balloon. But by Vishal, Bivash, just says Putin time. Yeah, we'll probably just go straight to Putin time because while many of you want to hear about spy balloon, I actually don't have any more information than you all do on spy balloon. However, I can make some comments on spy balloon if you like. The number one comment from the Plaid Avenger is WTF spy balloon. We have these things. My first thought of this whole story is spy balloon. China, you have these things called satellites. We're all spying on each other, by the way. Everybody is spying on everybody. And even countries that really don't have that much money, they got enough money to have a spy satellite or two. And friends are spying on friends, by the way. Allies spy on allies, much less spy on their adversaries or potential rivals or potential enemies, if not outright enemies. So everybody's spying on everybody, but we mostly do this in the cyber world and via satellite. So the main question I have is, what on God's green earth did you see with a balloon that you could not have seen otherwise? It actually makes me almost believe the Chinese government's take on this. And so the Chinese government's take for the entire week, last week when this started to get into the news, has been, it's just a private contractor's, private business's weather balloon that went off course. Okay. That seems improbable, if not completely BS from the propaganda machine that is Chinese news. However, what are you getting with a balloon? I mean, the only thing we do use balloons for are kind of low-level photography. But again, you can get that with satellites and temperature data and atmospheric data. That's what balloons are used for. So the weather balloon story shtick is almost believable if it just wasn't so preposterous that you lost your balloon and it ended up in Myrtle Beach. Oh, I think it's some shout outs here. Nation says death and destruction is cool, but balloon. First time chatter from Silty 7000. I guess the earthquake doesn't need explanation. At least we don't think it was human caused. No, you are correct, Silty. There isn't much for me to even add to the Turkish earthquake story. So quite frankly, I'd be much more glad to wax poetic / hysterically about the balloon thing more. So I'm glad you all picked that. The Turkey story is just too sad. By the way, whenever you start to see in the initial reports within the first 12 hours of a natural disaster, when they say death tolls at 1,500, my experience in the half century I've been alive on planet Earth is you can go ahead and add a 0 to that. So what I'm saying is the death toll was at 1,500 this morning and now 2,000. It's going to end up being 15 to 20,000 people dead as they kind of sift through literally the destruction and what's going on over there. And it's sad and it's terrible. However, it is kind of predictable too. The only follow-up comment I have on the Turkish earthquake story is, why is it that we as a species are still building in earthquake zones and volcanic zones and tidal wave zones and flood zones? It's kind of getting a little bizarre with the amount of knowledge we have that accumulates exponentially as every second passes, that we still are making the same mistakes of our forefathers millennia ago. I'll say that. Okay. Ethos subscribed with Prime. Thank you, Ethos. Thank you very much. Subscribing is always great. I don't even know what it means, but I love it when people do it. Maddie Van Over says the Chinese government just wanted to see how feral Americans would go over balloon. That's actually about as believable too. Again, my problem with the story is, what data can you get that you can't get some other more covert way? I don't have an answer. If someone could provide me the answer, then I'd be like, well, of course then China was collecting data, but I don't know what data they were getting. The reason I don't buy the weather balloon gone off track BS from the Chinese propaganda machine is because, I don't know if you know, but there are several other of these balloons over Latin America now too, or at least been reports of multiple balloons that the State Department has been tracking. So one balloon, shame on me. Multiple balloons, shame on the government, the Chinese government propaganda machine. Something weird is going on here. The bigger repercussions of this, by the way, and there are some, strangely enough, a balloon in the sky that immediately was taken over by the meme media of the United States and I guess the globe. Some fantastic memes have been going on all week. Just fantastic things of what the Chinese balloon captured in American life. And some of them are quite funny. As funny as the whole situation appears on its face, it does have real world implications. And one of them is that it has instantly turned U.S.-Chinese relations frosty. I don't know if you know, but the top State Department diplomat from the United States was supposed to go to China this week. And they're like, nope, that's off until we figure out what's going on here. And it's deeper than that, because there has been, for you first-time followers of international news this semester, perhaps because you're in world regions, the U.S.-Chinese relationship has been strained significantly in the last 5 to 100 years. And especially in the last 5 years since Donald Trump came to office, he really dropped the hammer on China and started a kind of a trade war. And even before Trump, for the last 10 years, call it 50, the U.S. has inflamed China with helping Taiwan, inflamed China by increased military drills with our partners like Japan and South Korea, and perhaps even Singapore, and perhaps in the future Philippines. So China claims pretty much half of the Pacific Ocean is theirs, a claim that the U.S. and others have flatly refused to respect its airspace over these disputed territorial waters. So there has been a lot going on with U.S.-China relations, and they are at an all-time low. I would say all-time low for my lifetime. And I'm old. I'm trying to think. There's been a couple of incidents where things flared in the last 10 or 20 years, but, military confrontations, almost military confrontations. But they came and went. This is like the lowest ebb for U.S.-Chinese relations. So the Biden administration was trying to warm relations. They were trying to get over the trade war stuff and saying, hey, okay, we are the two most important powers on planet Earth. We need to work together. We shouldn't be fighting. Let's start to reset the relations. That's why the top diplomat for the U.S. was going to China this week. So this is more problematic than a goofy balloon with a bunch of memes would imply on the face of it. And that's really all I got to say about that, because it was kind of the whole story so bizarre. No one really knows yet, including me. M-Wifer says, the U.S. looks pretty weak, though. Couldn't even shoot down a balloon. Well, sure we could shoot down a balloon. They just waited to shoot down the balloon. Anytime the U.S. military's not doing something immediately, it's because they're trying to track the source. They're figuring out what's going on before they shoot anything down. And for all the radicals, rabid military folks in America were like, the Biden administration sucks. They should have shot it down last week. Well, what if it was filled with anthrax? Should we have shot it down over North Dakota? I mean, you don't. A calculating mind says, okay, we don't know what this is, so we're not going to blow it up over top of airspace where there are citizens or below it. So I'm not defending the Biden administration. I'm simply saying, try to apply logic to these things. When it looks like we're weak because we didn't do something, it's like, well, what is the best course to follow? Let's figure that out first, which is what the U.S. was doing. Ethan Owen says, I hate to see what the footage over Myrtle Beach was like before it went down. And no one wants to see that footage, aerial or on the ground. We don't want to see either one. Ethan says, off topic, but what item off the Taco Bell menu pairs best with a port wine? Oh, Katie answered. What was your answer?
Sweeter items to the cinnamon twist.
Yeah.
Cinnabon Delights.
Cinnabon Delights for sure. First time chatter from A. Hannigan02. Maybe to test America's aerial response to a foreign object. See? Now, A. Hannigan is thinking. That's a thinking mind that's saying, let's throw a balloon over here to see what they do in case we want to do some other balloon. Maybe we're going to have a whole department of our army that's balloon warfare. Hey, one never knows what a foreign power is thinking, or even our government's thinking. Let's see. Olivia W. says they didn't shoot down the balloon until it was over water, so it wouldn't cause damage or injure people. There you go. Olivia's way ahead of me. And let's see. Edith says, thanks. Ignatius says, came for the balloon, stayed for the wine pairing. Stayed for the port wine pairing. Sergeant Sax 107's back in the hizzle saying, let's go. Sammy Bear is giving a shout out to Cinnabon Delights. Boom. Jessica Coca says they're definitely testing us. There's too much turmoil right now. I'm sure they're planning something. Yeah, I don't know, Jessica. I'm not terribly worried about let's say worst case scenario, a nuclear confrontation between the U.S. and China. I mean, a lot of the sci-fi books and films and series that have come out recently all are saying it's end game for humanity when the U.S. and China inevitably go to war. I'm not so convinced of that. I'm much more concerned with a confrontation between the U.S. and Russia, and increasingly, I won't say desperate, but backed into a corner Russia, led by one Vladimir Putin. There you go. There's the segue we were all waiting for, because that's what we were going to talk about tonight. I'll still talk about whatever you like, but we said we were going to talk about one of Vladimir Putin, and the biggest news of the day today may have been Turkish earthquakes or Chinese spy balloons, but the biggest event of all of last year was Russia's invasion of this sovereign state called Ukraine. A couple of headlines: geopolitical earthquake that defined 2022 and will transform the world for years to come. I agree with that statement. And also a 2020 review headline: Why has Vladimir Putin's Ukraine invasion gone so badly wrong? We are coming up on almost exactly 1 year, just in a few weeks here, because it was February 24th of last year that everybody assumed when Russia amassed a force of 130,000 troops and all the armaments along the Ukrainian border, that this was going to be a duck hunt, shooting fish in a barrel, that this war was going to start and finish very quickly because of Russia's overwhelming military supremacy. All of us, myself included, for those of you that were here last week when I was talking about Ukraine, myself included, you got to call yourself out when you're wrong. I was totally wrong. I did a podcast that said, yeah, the Russian military is 10 to 1, in some cases 20 to 1 more powerful than the Ukrainian military. It's seemingly impossible that they don't take over eastern Ukraine in a day and possibly the entire country if they want to a week or two after that. Me and a million other dork-ass pundits were completely and utterly wrong. And here we are a year later with the fighting still raging, but Ukraine still standing as a sovereign state intact, and in some cases having taken back some of its property. So this one headline, why has Vladimir Putin's invasion gone so wrong? Yeah, a lot of folks, myself included, do refer to this as Putin's war. This is a war of choice. Russia was under no imminent threat by Ukraine. The leader of Russia, one Vladimir Putin, simply said, I am going to take over this other country. This is not speculation on my part. Russian hackers are after me right now for making fun of their dear leader. I think even you hackers would agree. This is a war of choice that Vladimir Putin has couched a lot of very good propaganda around, saying, we're threatened by NATO, or Ukraine used to be ours, or some other historical stuff. But indeed, it still remains a fact that Russia's invasion was by choice. They decided to go do this. They weren't called to action because they were attacked. So this is still very much Putin's war. And that brings to the question, well, why did he do it, for starters, perhaps? And Ukraine itself, why did he invade Ukraine first, or at all? And is Ukraine European? Is it Russian? Or is it something else altogether? Is really a matter of perspective. Having said that, let me return to the chat room. First time chatter from Gibbs Likes to Chill. Welcome, Gibbs. My name is Gibbs. I got that, Gibbs. That's good. And I like to chill. I also picked up that from your screen name. I think Putin is going crazy. Come on, man. Respect Ukraine's sovereignty. I think I agree with all of Gibbs Likes to Chill's statements, both about his or her name and his or her fact that they like to chill, and that Vladimir Putin may be going crazy. Ignatius chimes in. It still amazes me how they got Crimea. Yes, Ignatius. So Ignatius points out that back in 2014, Vladimir Putin decided on his own to take over this place called Crimea Peninsula. And they did it. And they did it in 48 hours. And so Ignatius probably remembers, if not the rest of you, if you were following news at that point in your life, that, they certainly used the game plan, the blueprint for the invasion of Crimea, which they did accomplish in 48 hours, covertly, by the way. They still claim they never did it. And so they definitely used that as a game plan / blueprint and said, wow, we took over Crimea in 48 hours. This is definitely the plan we're going to do to just take over the whole country. We can do this. This is no worries. And it did not work to that plan. The Blind Barber in the Hizzle. Interesting screen name and profession choice. Is there any chance that Putin would defy the nuclear testing ban and test a new nuke just to threaten the West and test their response to a more serious threat? I think that's absolutely possible, the Blind Barber. And I think it's not only possible, I think it's increasingly probable. I think it's increasingly probable that some radical show of force to try to further intimidate the West and or Ukraine specifically is in order. I'm surprised it actually hasn't happened already. Sammy Bear says the West already caved and gave up on the German tanks. Now that Russia is breaking out the drones and longer-range weapons, what do you think it will take for the West to give Ukraine long-range missiles? Sammy Bear, I do not believe they will give Ukraine long-range missiles for some of the things we talked about last week, in that the West is not going to give any potentially offensive weapons to Ukraine. Everything they're giving them is defensive. That's why this is going to remain a Cold War between NATO countries, the U.S., and Russia. Keep it cold, keep it chill between the major nuclear powers. If the NATO countries and or the United States gives offensive weapons, so what I mean by that is weapons that the Ukrainians could use to penetrate into Russian territory, into Mother Russia proper. Dare I say, go look at somebody, Google map it real quick. How far is Ukrainian territory from Moscow? A long-range missile could easily be launched from Ukraine to hit the capital of Russia. That's kind of a big deal. It's enough that Putin's Russia would use that. If Ukraine were to be granted or given long-range weapons, and certainly something like a nuclear weapon, Putin would then use that immediately as justification to use possibly a small nuclear weapon on Ukraine. So no one really wants it to go in that direction. So all of the weapons that are being given to Ukraine currently and probably forever will be defensive weapons. Defensive. They are there to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine itself, but nothing that will go beyond that. Does that make sense? First time chatter from Mert. Mert VT says, do quizzes happen after these live streams? Not directly. I will try to get to it tonight, but probably tomorrow morning. Sammy Bear says, if Russia breaks the... Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. I already got that one from Sammy Bear. Bivash says, wait, wouldn't Russia not do that because they don't want to be nuked themselves? That's my current fear, Bivash. We don't know. Russia is getting backed into a corner and getting isolated diplomatically and economically and politically on the world stage. It's always a very delicate dance. You want to punish a country for bad behavior, but a nuclear-armed country, how much do you want to punish them and isolate them and get them to a point that they might literally go crazy? And with Vladimir Putin controlling literally all facets of government, all levers of power, all nuclear weapons, all of the military, Vladimir Putin is a true dictator at this point. There's nobody second-guessing him. There's no backup. There's no checks on power. So if Vladimir Putin himself truly goes insane, that is a problem for our species. We don't want that. I don't think any of us wants that. So that's why we will give defensive weapons and try to keep telling Russia, hey, we don't like this. It's illegal international law. This is a sovereign state. We're going to keep helping them until you leave them alone. But we're not trying to go as far as say, and we are going to help anybody who attacks you. We're hoping that keeps the sanity at bay for Vladimir Putin. So yeah, don't count out that a leader with all of the power may take it upon him or herself. Let's just call himself. There's no women in power are crazy enough to do shit like this. You don't want to push them to the break point of, I don't care anymore. If I'm personally embarrassed, that's going to embarrass Russia, and I would rather kill the whole world than have my country and me personally embarrassed. And as that sounds egotistical and petty, it is. That's because governments are made up of humans who are egotistical and petty, or can be egotistical and petty. First time chatter from Sarah's Jam says, I heard that Poland is planning to drastically increase their military in response to the Ukraine invasion, and some people are saying there is a chance they might become the dominant military power in Europe in the near future, besides Russia. What are your thoughts on the probability of that? Oh my gosh, Sarah's Jam. I don't think I'm even going to get to the lecture tonight. These are great assessments. You guys should all go into foreign policy. I totally agree, Sarah Jams. In fact, that's public knowledge that Poland is the most, I won't say most scared. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are actually the most scared because they're small states without big militaries, but they're NATO members. And Poland has the most to lose here. It's already been taken over by Germany once, by Russia partly at the same time, and then was a puppet state of USSR for a long time. They do not want to go backwards, and they were a proud country, a sovereign state that has been thrown into chaos the entire 20th century. Maybe I'll get to some of that chaos in the next couple lectures, because it ain't going to be this one already. But Poland, go back in time, go Wikipedia Polish history. Poland was a major dynasty and empire of Eastern Europe at multiple points in the last, call it 100,000 years, millennia. So it's quite used to being a power player, and it is a very big country, and it is a fact. They have been very worried about Russian aggression since they were taken over by Russia for most of the 20th century. And they are loud and proud going to be spending a lot more money in building up a much stronger military. And therefore, it does make sense that the balance of power within Europe itself is changing. There's no way around it. Germany forever has been seen as the military powerhouse. I don't know why. Go see World War I and World War II. But because of World War I and World War II, Germany has been very hesitant to become a major military power again. They have the armaments and they have a military. They're very indisposed, unprone, unwanting, not looking to be a military leader again. For all the right reasons, perhaps, if you know German military history. So Poland stepping up and saying, we don't mind being a military leader. We share a border with the crazy Ruskies over here. So that seems likely to me. France is a military power too, by the way, but fill in the blank for your French surrender jokes there. And they're further away from Russia. So to me, it makes perfect sense that Poland will not only arm itself much more in the coming days, weeks, months, years, and decade, but they will probably be encouraged by the United States and NATO countries to do that very thing. And because they will become more powerful, they will have a bigger voice within NATO and the European Union and Europe in general. So you could see a German-Poland axis of power really ramp up in your lifetimes. Mine's almost done, so I won't see much of it. But in your lifetimes, that is a very real possibility. Very good assessment, Sarah James. But back to Ukraine. Is it Russian? Is it European? Is it a sovereign state? Is it a colony of Russia? Is it a historic relic of Russia? It is a matter of perspective. And we could have that debate, but there's one person who doesn't have that debate. And another dude on the planet that looks at an entirely different set of maps and histories and concludes that Ukraine and perhaps many other parts of Eastern Europe, including Poland, may not be part of Europe at all, but a part of Russia. And who would that dude be? See, I just have segue after segue set up here. That dude, of course, is one of Vladimir Putin, and that's what we were going to talk about tonight. But half the hour is already gone already, but that's okay. I had no aspirations we were going to get through this anyway. However, someone remind me, I didn't get hardly anybody help me make test questions last time. So Sarah Jams, Bivash, Ignatius, those are already some good quiz questions you guys have pulled out. So can you cut and paste your comments or make me a test question or two based on the chat we just had? And I'll give you some extra points for that. And anybody else that wants to help me make questions for this entire podcast, the more people that help, the more points I give you, but then also the faster I get the quiz up. Okay, well, how to go backwards? Okay, cool. Vladimir Putin wanted to pop up twice under flames. Okay. And on February 24th, almost exactly a year ago, he personally decided to redraw the map of Europe to better fit his worldview, which is what we've been talking about now for the last half hour. Now, this is the map of Europe that Vladimir Putin most remembers. It's the one that gives him the most troubles. It's the one that gives him the most nightmares. It's the one that gives him the most stomach ulcers. These two maps, if you learn nothing else tonight, this is what drives Vladimir Putin, current president of Russia. And if you don't know what you're seeing here, the map on the left, the before map, is Great Soviet Union time of controlling Eastern Europe for the greater part of the last century. A 50-year run of controlling what is now what we call Eastern Europe, a 50-year run of controlling those states you see lit up there from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, Eastern Germany, Romania, Bulgaria. Many of those states are now in NATO. Many of those states are now EU members. Many of those states we would now call Western. All of those states we would call European. Vladimir Putin does not like that because that's the map he remembers. And after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and signed itself out of existence, you see the map on the right, the aftermap. And the aftermap is a lot less red. So if you learn nothing else tonight, or even the next lecture, this is what bothers Vladimir Putin the most. The most. And one could easily argue, and I'm sure biographers of Vladimir Putin do this all the time, that the dissolution, the destruction of the great Soviet Union was a geopolitical disaster that frames all of Vladimir Putin's thought and actions in the last 20 years. There's an argument to be made that that's it. That's all you got. You don't have to know nothing else about the guy. This guy does not like these two maps, and he has worked very hard to perhaps start to undo these two maps, or at least get 1991 map back to looking like the 1989 map. To the chat room, M. Wifer says, do you think the U.S. and the rest of the West will ever stop funding / supplying Ukraine? I do not think so, no. The U.S., because the U.S. sees Russia out of a Cold War lens as a world spoiler that perhaps may be bent on domination of a lot of our allies in Europe, and perhaps even a world domination role. That's certainly how the whole Cold War was fought. It was existential. The U.S. was fighting against the Soviet Union for an existential world, or an existential world that was not just free of communism, but open for democracy and capitalism and all these other things. So that's why the U.S. will continue to fight this fight, because they see the re-rise of a very disagreeable Vladimir Putin as trying to reclaim a past that we already fought a century against. So the U.S. is going to keep fighting. To make it much more real for Europeans, the Europeans see a leader of Russia who wants to redominate them physically in their own territories. So all the Europeans, especially the Eastern Europeans, are going to stick by the defense of Ukraine, because if Ukraine falls, many of them think we're next. And that's not perhaps a bad thing to be thinking, because you could be. Especially if Ukraine would have fallen in less than 72 hours, which we all assumed. I was looking already of like, well, the next big confrontation will be when Russia invades Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I actually assumed they would invade them first. Okay, so no to the stopping supplying. Gibbs likes to chill, says the map to the right, pre-World War II, didn't Germany own some land around there? What motivated Germany to invade Poland? Maybe wrong, but wanted clarification. So that map on the right is not pre-World War II, it's post-World War II. So 1949, it's post-World War II. Those are the borders that we all agree to in today's world. They all were there by 1949. The World War II ended in 1945. Lines were redrawn. We formed up in 1947 this thing called the United Nations. We all agreed to respect each other's borders. These are the borders we've been looking at ever since 1947. So what you're seeing in Germany there is that when the Iron Curtain fell, and by the way, do you all need me to go back and give you some whole 20th century history of the Cold War and World War II to the Cold War so you understand why there's this face-off in Eastern Europe? I will include that next lecture when we get to more Vladimir Putin-focused stuff, because you do have to understand that to understand these maps. I should never assume that everybody understands World War II and the Cold War. But the map on the right, Gibbs, is, left, the before map. The Germany that you see in red is because after World War II, when we were drawing all these borders and forming up the United Nations and settling out peace, this thing called the Iron Curtain fell. And that was all of the countries behind this line that you see pretty much in the red countries. The Soviet Union said, well, we're going to take care of these guys, and they all want to be communist. And we held elections in these countries, and they all voted to become communist states, so they're going to be part of a greater Eastern Bloc that's aligned with Great Soviet Union. It was a farce, by the way. Now I'm just starting to give you the history, but that was a farce. And Germany, as the defeated country, was split in two. So the Western allies came in from the West, and Russia came in from the East. And to crush Germany, the home state. And when they did, that's when that line got drawn. And then the Iron Curtain fell and the two sides faced off, the two sides being the Soviet Union versus the West and its allies. At that time, and this is again 1947, we drew that line because that was Soviet-occupied Germany. The other side was Western Allies-occupied Germany. And thus, during the Cold War, during the entirety of the Cold War from 49 to 89, that little section of Germany was called East Germany and was under the Soviet umbrella, if that makes sense. As soon as the Soviet Union imploded and went away, East Germany and West Germany voted to reunify. And that's been that way since 92, I think, if that helps make sense. Okay, first time chatter. Thank you all for the first time chats. Nancy P22. So is Putin trying to pull Poland and Ukraine back into Russia? Or like, what is the whole point of all this? Yes, Nancy, that's actually kind of cutting all the way to the end of this lecture, which will be about 5 hours later. But yes, you've cut to it. Many would argue, myself included, Vladimir Putin sees the collapse of the Soviet Union as a giant geopolitical disaster that's embarrassing to the Russians. He thinks that many of these territories in Eastern Europe historically should be allied with Russia, historically belong to Russia. In Ukraine's case, he said it outright. It belongs to us. It's where we're from. It's us. In fact, he's gone so far as to say there's no such thing as Ukrainian people. They're just Russian people that speak with a slightly different accent. So, yes, the answer is yes. He considers the current map of Europe offensive and that it's encroaching on Russian territory and threatening Russia, particularly the adoption of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania into NATO, a Western defense organization, which you're going to learn about if you haven't learned about it already in this class. So countries that border directly with Russia are in a Western defensive organization, and those countries used to be part of Russia. So Vladimir Putin looks at this map and he's wildly offended, saying Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, these are all ours. And they're not only ours, but you guys are trying to take them over and put weapons in these countries that directly border us. And that's offensive to us, and it's threatening to us. Many academics, scholars, pundits, politicians in Russia, and, by the way, the United States, and in the world, many have actually blamed the West for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I find that preposterous, but hey, just my opinion, just like everybody else has an opinion. And so many pundits say the inclusion of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania into NATO and the possibility of including Ukraine in the EU and therefore possibly eventually including Ukraine in NATO is pushing Russia too far. You're making them feel insecure. You're surrounding them, and you're surrounding them, especially in NATO countries. NATO countries, by entry into NATO, have to have a good military, and they have to have weapons. They have to have long and short-term weapons. So Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania now have weapons that would be pointed at Russia if Russia were to come into conflict with a NATO country. And Russia says that's offensive, and that's threatening to us. And again, many pundits would say, we agree with Vladimir Putin. That is offensive to Russia, and you are the ones that have pushed NATO to go too far to close to Russia. And now this is the result that Vladimir Putin thinks he has to invade Ukraine just for their own self-defense. And that is the argument that Vladimir Putin is making. Do we even need to talk about this whole lecture about Vladimir Putin? We're learning so much here already, are we not? First-time chatter from Sober and Chile. Sober and Chill, not Chile. I wish I had some chili. I'm hungry. First-time chatter, Sober and Chill. Are there really monsters on Earth? Yes, there are people that would sacrifice their own citizens and the human race for their own personal pride. Make no bones about it. It sounds horrific. It sounds unbelievable. Those people do exist. We all live in constant stress that those people don't get their hands on nuclear weapons and don't become leaders of countries with nuclear weapons. But here we are. Now, Vladimir Putin has not launched a nuclear war yet, so perhaps he's not that monster yet, but there is fear that he could be. First time chatter from Go Hokies. If Putin were to not be in power, would his party still support these world map views? I know that was mentioned that his party was dominant within Russia, but I didn't know whether that was part of their beliefs. Not so much. So I think it's United Russia. It's either United Russia or One Russia is the political party. You call it like the Republican Party in the U.S. It's a conservative party. However, it is really now, because Vladimir Putin holds 100% of the power. And by 100%, I mean 100. He doesn't listen to anybody. He doesn't have to listen to anybody. So even that United Russia political party they're just cheerleaders for him. So having said that, there are real politicians in there, and not everybody agrees with this war. It's impossible for us to know how many Russians do not want this war and do not agree with this war, because Vladimir Putin controls the press and the media and everything, all information, everything that goes in, everything that goes out. So we'll never know how many people don't want this war. It's likely that it's a lot. It's likely that a lot of politicians and perhaps even people in the military don't really support this war either. And it's certainly the case, I would say, with a decent degree of confidence that it's the United Russia Party and or the majority of Russians do not feel the way that Vladimir Putin does about needing to reconquest Eastern Europe. That's a small branch of radicals, I'd say, within the United Russia Party. The same way you have, say a radical right fringe in the Republican Party now that would install Donald Trump as dictator for life, or that would overthrow the Congress. I mean, that is a minority view within the Republican Party of the United States. And I think this concept of we need to retake Europe back over is a minority view among scholars and politicians and government officials in Russia. Again, speculation, but I've been following Vladimir Putin since he took office. That was in 1998, and so I've seen reference and read tons of articles about certain academics, certain right-wing firebrands that caught his ear early, who do think that Russia needs to retake over Europe. And certainly he's been listening to those pundits, but in the last 25 years of me following Russia, that's never been a majority opinion that I've seen expressed by anybody. It's always been kind of a fringe opinion that is now gaining more strength because they're actually trying to do it, and everybody's rallying around the flag, so to speak. Hopefully that answers that question. Go Hokies. The Blind Barber says, if Putin was somehow able to extend his territory all the way back to East Germany, would he stop there? Would he keep going all the way to Portugal if no one stopped him? Yeah, we're now playing what if games that would never happen. So obviously, if he were to invade any NATO countries, and by that would be Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. If he invades any of those countries, well, now we're at nuclear war. So he would never make it to Portugal. It just wouldn't happen. Ignatius says, I mean, if I were a power-hungry dictator, I don't think a simple borderline would stop me from continuing. If it gets to that point, it would probably be an invasion based on the whole, I have a duty to protect Russian citizens wherever they are. Yes, good call, Ignatius, as always. Do keep this in mind. This does kind of feel like an easy question if somebody will help me write questions. One of the kind of principles that Vladimir Putin has been espousing, and he's been espousing this for a decade. Again, I've been following this guy for a while, and world events, but at least for a decade since I've been paying attention, Vladimir Putin has been suggesting that ethnically Russian people need to be protected wherever they are. And not all ethnic Russian people are in Russia. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You see where this is going. So back to both of the last two questions. Would Vladimir Putin take over all of Europe? No. However, he's been making a case for some time, and especially since 2014 when they took over Crimea. He said it in a speech. It's my duty as the president of Russia to protect ethnically Russian people wherever they are, including other countries. So he has set the foundation for that argument for some time now. If he is allowed to persist If he ends up winning in Ukraine, he'll probably only take over, say, eastern Ukraine. He'll probably take over all of the coastline of the Black Sea, and he'll go over and take over Moldova, which has a bunch of ethnic Russian people in it. All of eastern Ukraine has a bunch of ethnic Russian people in it. He could easily absorb Belarus tomorrow because it's mostly ethnic Russian people in it. And he could make the argument that he needs to invade Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania because there's ethnic Russian people in it. In fact, I would have put money on that would have been his gambit. He would have first and foremost made up a story that ethnically Russian people were being picked on or killed in Estonia and used that as a pretext for invasion. I had a lot of money riding on that scenario, and he should have probably done it because he might have got away with it. He bit off way more than he could chew with Ukraine, apparently, even though it seemed like an easier target. So, does that make sense? He is going to continue to protect Russian citizens, and he may keep this up. And if he's eventually successful in Ukraine, he may start to expand Russia's borders to encompass all of the ethnic Russian people. It seems unlikely he's even going to be able to pull that off at this point, given the resistance, the fierce resistance he's gotten, not just from Ukraine, but from the world on his invasion of Ukraine. So we'll see how that's going. Sarah Jam says, how popular is Putin in Russia? Ballpark 60 to 75% approval rating right now. I'll be conservative. 60. It's more than half. And it could be 90. That seems high. But it has been that high in times past. And I'll get to that during some of the lecture. Sarah Jan says, I know there were protests in Russia over the Ukraine invasion, so is there any chance of Russia having a civil war regime change? Does not seem likely. He is too powerful. He controls every single thing, and everyone who comes up against him ends up dead. And so he is I think we do have to call him a kind of a true dictator at this point. By the way, for all the Russian hackers, attacking my bank account right now, I used to like the guy. I followed him since 1997, and I thought he was a really good fit for Russia. And he did great things in Russia for a solid 10 to 15 years. So it's only been the latter half of his career there that he has become more despotic. And even that I could live with. I was like, well, it's kind of still a democracy, and he does have a high approval rating. So who the hell am I to tell Russians they're voting in the wrong guy? They like the guy. Let him lead. But now that you're taking over other countries, and I think, I hate to say this, but this almost feels like a test question too. I think we're starting to have a strong case for genocide. And this has not been brought up much on the world stage, and I'm surprised it has not, because to me it's an easy argument at this point. Vladimir Putin has said outright, I don't think there is any such thing as Ukrainians. They're just Russians with an accent. Historically, they were ours. So this war of aggression by choice, coupled with war crimes that are happening, coupled with them taking Ukrainian children out of Ukraine and taking them to Russia now to be adopted by Russian families. I know, I wish I was making this up. I am not. So you can start to make the easy argument of, hey, what's genocide? Oh, when you try to obliterate a people, and more importantly, obliterate its culture from existence. And from his own speeches himself, Vladimir Putin has kind of suggested that he doesn't believe in Ukrainian culture. So all of these moves could easily be construed as, oh, you're trying to get rid of it. You're trying to get rid of Ukrainian culture. That's genocide. So there's a lot going on here that I'm actually surprised has not happened on the world stage yet, but maybe I'm ahead of my time as a futurist, thinking about things that will soon come to pass. First time chatter from Bernaldi20 says, do a lot of Russians agree with Putin that the 1949-1980 map is the correct map? Again, I talked about this a little earlier, Bernaldi. I'm not really sure. We don't know how many Russians agree so vehemently that the clock needs to be turned back and the Eastern Europe needs to be reabsorbed. One would guess it was a fringe element 20 years ago, maybe 5 or 10%. One has to assume it's grown since then, especially since they're conducting this war, and there's a tendency for people in a country to support their leader and support the country in times of war. So maybe it's 50% now that really think they need to get Ukraine back and really think they need to get Estonia back. But we don't know because we can't get any real information out of real Russians because of the total and utter control that Vladimir Putin has of all media and all information in his own country. Mert VT says, I see NATO as a power against Putin at this point. Before it was the USSR, but now it's just Putin. I agree, Mert. Very good assessment. However, what happens once there is a more Western idealized Russian leader? What will be the point of NATO? Will they need a new enemy? That is a question for the future, and a very good one, Mert. No one knows, certainly not myself. One can make the argument, and NATO has made this argument, that we don't know what the future threats are, likely China. Before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, most pundits, politicians, world leaders would have assumed that the next kind of big threat to the West or to Eurasia was going to be China. That's still what most people do say. Yes, that's obvious. They're going to have they have the biggest military on planet Earth. They're going to have the biggest economy. They have the biggest population. They might have a tendency to want to take over Taiwan, possibly North Korea, possibly want to take over these are all possibilities. So that's what most folks were focused on. China is the next big thing. And under that kind of thinking, well, you wouldn't just disband NATO. NATO now has become kind of Team West, a term I made up the word Team West a decade or two ago. And it kind of sticks, and it's kind of becoming more reality in terms of NATO is now, for all intents and purposes, NATO is Team West's military wing. And Team West are a group of countries that agree upon certain ideals of human rights, of capitalism, of democracy, of freedom of movement, of a whole variety of things, of the currently accepted laws and principles of sovereignty. Team West agrees on all those things. So as the defensive military wing of a Team West, which is global in dimension, because Australia's on Team West, Japan's on Team West, I don't see NATO going anywhere. And the idea, maybe I'm showing my Western bias, but the idea that NATO simply exists to try to kill Russia, that's an entirely Russian concept. I just, again, I'm jaded because I'm from the West. No one in a NATO country wants World War III. Everyone in NATO countries knows that they attack Russia, it would be World War III. So you just logic it out. No one in Team West wants a nuclear confrontation with Russia. Russia is utterly convinced, at least leaders like Putin, are utterly convinced that NATO is just waiting to pounce and kill them. But they keep forgetting the whole acronym called MAD, M-A-D. You guys know MAD, right? Mutually Assured Destruction. There's no way that NATO countries are going to attack Russia. It's simply not going to happen. It's in its own charter. It's a defensive organization, not offensive. It will not attack without being attacked first. It's in its bylaws. So I have to think that, yeah, the 20-odd countries in NATO are true to their word, and they are capitalist democracies who believe in human rights and don't want the end of the species. They're not going to start a war with Vladimir Putin, but he does not believe that. And so that's part of his mission of, I need to take back Eastern Europe because NATO is going to get us someday. And I'm like, well, most of us just don't think that. But certainly now that Vladimir Putin's Russia, has shown that it wants to reconquest territory, NATO's mission is firmly in place and will be going nowhere for decades. Even if Russia were to join NATO, which I actually thought might happen in the early 2000s, back when I was teaching. Right when I started teaching, I was that naive. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was kind of invited to join, because most were thinking, hey, China's going to be the big global power that may encroach on Russia's territory, which may still happen, by the way. So there was hope back in the early days that Russia would become more Western and maybe even be part of these organizations. But Russia sees itself in a different light, and that's okay. But NATO's not going anywhere. And even if Russia were to join NATO tomorrow, or if Russia imploded tomorrow, went away. NATO's not going anywhere because leaders like Putin reaffirm why you need strong military defensive organizations, because you don't know what's coming next. You don't know what leader is coming next. So while we might not have any beef with Russia, we don't know when a madman's going to take over and say, I want to declare war on everybody. NATO's mission and its structure and its future are firmly entrenched and going nowhere. Back to Bivash says, wouldn't there be anyone who would stop Putin if he wanted to use nuclear weapons like his advisors? Bivash, that's the million-dollar question. We hope that there would be somebody there who says, hey, let's not end the species so that you can maintain your personal pride. We hope, but we do not know that. It does not appear there is anyone up for the challenge to confront Vladimir Putin directly about anything. Many advisors likely knew that this war plan that they were conducting was not going to work, but everyone is too scared to tell him. Try to remember Hitler back in the end days of World War II, if you're a World War II buff. And no, I'm not calling Vladimir Putin Hitler. That's always like the last argument you make when you're just throwing stuff against a wall. I'm saying it's similar scenarios in many ways, but just personally, everyone was so terrified of Hitler that many of his commanders, and especially ones in the field, were like, this is going to fail. And everybody was too scared to tell him. And everybody's like, well, the boss wants this. Guess we're going to go have another million soldiers get killed. I kind of feel that's where they're at right now in Vladimir Putin's Russia. Things are not going well, and everyone's too scared to tell the big boss that it ain't going to work. So everybody's just kind of going through the motions. Hopefully they won't go through the motions when he says, well, let's have a nuclear war. I hope that is not going to be the case, Bivash. First time chatter from Duckle Rabbits. Somewhat off topic, but I'm kind of curious if Putin were to leave office, are there any hints to who might take his place? We talked about this last week, actually. There is one, Dmitry Medvedev, that might fill his shoes. He actually served as president and prime minister, and I think he might still be prime minister right now. He's a fairly sober individual, a fairly sane individual from all accounts. Possibly him, but again, we're talking about what ifs. And Vladimir Putin doesn't appear to be going anywhere anytime soon. My assumption is he dies in office 20 years from now. What the world looks like at that point, I don't know. But I don't see him getting taken out. He's never stepping down. Never. He will never step down as president of Russia. And unless there's an assassination, and it would be internal, palace coup, which anything's possible. But it doesn't seem probable right now because he owns everything. When you own all the power, there's no one that wants to go up against you because you'll die. So Bivash says, how does Putin have so much power? I'm surprised people in his party haven't tried to remove him by force to gain power. I will talk about that if we ever get to this Putin lecture, Bivash, but he has accumulated power over 25 years now. 25 years of accumulating power from the word go into a state that now serves him, not the other way around. Ignatius says, you yourself mentioned, Professor, but the UN seems to be scared of the word genocide. That is true. You are absolutely true, Ignatius. I did say that. I stand by that. We know what Putin is doing is wrong, and there is good cause for UN overreach. However, there's a possible bee's nest there that doesn't blame them for wanting not to disturb. I agree. I think they got enough going on, and the Ukrainian war is still up in the air. So if indeed it starts to look like Ukraine's going to lose and Russia does take over, I think then the genocide card will be played. But until that point comes, they might just be like, well, let's just hold off. That's a card we'll play on another day. And finally, Brighton Y125 says, how much debt is Ukraine going to be in after all this? 0. They are getting given so much money and so many armaments, and their entire military structure at this point, I think, is paid for in full, was given to them by Team West. So, and they got a lot more to come, and a lot more money's flowing in. More gets promised every day. However, the hour is already up, and I'm on slide 2, and I haven't started the Vladimir Putin lecture. So, how about I end the Vladimir Putin lecture by just chatting and having some fun with some Vladimir Putin memes. And then maybe I'll get to like 5 or 6 things that we can get some test questions on, and we'll call it a night. And I'll restart this lecture next week. Or I can try it later this week if you like too. Just let me know what's a good day for you all. But this slide just says, once again, reinforcing, just look at this slide just momentarily, just reinforcing again Vladimir Putin's view of Russia over time, just in the last century, almost exactly 100 years of Russian maps just in Europe. And you see how much more territory they used to control outright, including Poland, including parts of Finland that were autonomous provinces back at the turn of 2 centuries ago. Then the Soviet Union grew, and then the Soviet Union puppet states grew even more. And now you see how much it's retracted. So who is this dude who wants to perhaps once again redraw the maps of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe? It's one Vladimir. Is a man of many talents, a man of many titles, a man of many moods. I love this. Some of these memes, by the way, are from original meme land, like 10 or 15 years ago when people started doing this thing called memes. In fact, how old are memes? When were the first memes put out? I still go for the classic memes like this, just with a picture with a word. But we have on this slide Vladimir Putin when he was young, Dadimir Putin when he fathered a child, Sadimir Putin when he cries, Madimir Putin most of the time now, Vladimir Putin very rarely, and badass Vladimir Putin most of the time. So many other Vladimirs of note, though. Let's make sure we are on the same page about the Vlad that we're going to talk about, perhaps, next class. And that is, let's play a quick round of Know Your Vladimirs, because Vladimir is a very common name in Russian culture, perhaps even in Ukrainian culture, but know the Vlads in Russian history and in today's Russia. So Putin may be the great one right now, but he actually isn't, all caps, the great Vlad. Would anybody know who the great is? Vladimir the Great? I doubt it unless you're really into Russian history. The great Vlad was one Vladimir the First, Prince of Novgorod, Grand Prince of Kiev. Wait a minute, Kiev, isn't that the capital of Ukraine? It is. That's part of the story. And ruler of the Kievan Rus from 980 to 1015. One of his main claims to fame is that he adopted, as the state religion, adopted Christianity, what we now call Russian Orthodoxy. He is the one, the leader, who adopted that as the state religion. Back in 980, or the turn of the last millennium, 2 millenniums ago, it was up in the air. This is the early days of what would become the state of Russia, or Russian people even. And so it was up in the air what religion they might become. 1,000 years ago in Europe, you did have Christianity that had been spreading for near on 1,000 years, but you also had the advent of Islam, which had cropped up around the year 600 or 700 and spread across parts of Europe and Eastern Europe and Central Asia and the Middle East. So the area of Kievan Rus was really up for grabs with lots of different people from lots of different places. And the story is, and this is the funny punchline here, possible test question. The rumor is that Vladimir the Great, chose Christianity over Islam because once he heard about the ban on drinking in Islam, he said, oh, well, Russians like to drink, so that one's not going to work, so we'll be Christians. How much truth to that there is? Who knows? But it's reasonable. On to the next Vlad. Now, Vladimir Putin may be scary, but he isn't the scariest Vlad. For my money, if I'm a betting man, I go with this Vlad. Does anybody know who this Vlad is? This is Vlad III, a.k.a. Vlad the Impaler, a.k.a. Vlad Dracula, Prince of Wallachia from 1448 until they burned him at the stake, I think. The original Dracula. He's much more scary, or is he? Actually, he wasn't nuclear armed, so actually Putin may still be the scariest Vlad. Now, Putin is already an important historical figure, and he's not even dead yet. But he isn't the most important Vladimir, not yet, even in Russian history. I'll let you guys guess on this one. Can you think of a perhaps more important, more historically important, a more important historical Vladimir in Russian history? I'll give this a second while I take a sip. No responses? No one. There you go. Bivash up in the Hizzle says, Vlad the Impaler. Mert's going right back to Vlad the Impaler. How about this dude? Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, a.k.a. Vladimir Lenin. Russian communist revolutionary politician, political theorist. That commie guy. You've heard of the commie guy. Kind of in charge of Russia from 1917 to 1924. That's not very long. However, he is the one that implemented, fought for, and was the brainchild of communism, which did take over in Russia because of him for the better part of the 20th century and did impact not just Russia, but the entire world. So he still has a slight edge of historical importance over Vladimir. But if Vladimir Putin decides to end humanity, I guess he'll take the title from Vladimir Lenin because that'd be much more important than communism. Okay, Putin is an Eastern-leaning leader, meaning he is anti-West now, outright, and pro-East, leaning towards China. But he is the easternmost Vlad. That would be Vlad I Vostok. Does anybody know who Vlad I Vostok is? He's much more eastern than Vladimir Putin because Vlad I Vostok isn't actually a person at all, but it's a city. It's the only major city way, way, way out on the east coast of Russia, near North Korea, right across the bay from Japan. Vladivostok, major industrial port, the biggest Vlad over on the eastern side. But the Vlad we're talking about, of course, is one of Vladimir Putin, with the plane exploding behind him, my favorite meme from the early 2010s. Easily the world leader with the highest nipple exposure of all time. I changed that to be topless. I don't know. Which one is offensive? In a world that people are gender fluid or non-binary or non-gender, I think I can say the word nipple now, right? I don't think that's offensive. What do you all think? But the joke here is that he's easily, with no second place, the world leader with the highest topless/nipple exposure of all time. You will not find another world leader with as many shirtless pictures of him out there. It doesn't exist. Not even Genghis Khan had his shirt off as much as this dude. Hannah Scott says, free the nipples. Vladimir Putin invented that, Hannah. He was so far ahead of his time. But he also, more recently, is being seen, perhaps by himself, sees himself as the new czar. The third Rome rises once more. He sees himself as a Slavic savior, as a leader of Russian national identity and maybe Russian ethnic identity worldwide. An identity that is neither part of Team West nor really part of Asia East of him. He has always seen, and most Russians do too, by the way, as Russia as distinctly Russian, not on either side, East nor West. Duckle Rabbit says, I heard this guy's cracked at hockey too, absolutely dominating Russian team single-handedly. You could have something there. Let's finish up with a few more memes of them, though. So you want to know the story of this Putin fellow? Look at this guy chilling on Lake Baikal. This dude, first off, I usually ask, maybe I'll come back to this slide once we start up next week. But before I ask what you all know about him, here's what I know about him. He's a former KGB operative. He was a president. He is a president. He was a prime minister. He's a president again. He's the baddest ass of all the baddest asses on the planet when it comes to world leaders. That's a picture of him with a tiger in front of him that he shot. He is a master of all manly sports, including hockey. There you go, Duckle Rabbits. He's a black belt in judo. He's a fisherman, a scuba diver, a huntsman, a hockey player. He did shoot that tiger you see. This is a true story because I remember when this happened back in the day when he was still kind of widely admired on the global stage, including by people like me, was he had a camera crew following him around, which he has done for 20 years, to capture all of his manly moments. And they were out, I think, hunting or maybe even just trying to spot a tiger. And the tiger charged the camera crew party that he was with, and he whipped out his rifle and fired one off. It's a tranquilizer dart. It's not dead. But supposedly on camera, he's the one that actually shot the damn Siberian tiger. First time chatter from Ann's Quackboy says, "Go Hokies, I had this man as a professor in 2013. Thanks for joining, Quackboy." You might remember some of these memes I'm showing that I probably showed him back in 2013. So he is a master of, master of all manly sports. He's a master of all manly weapons. And I guess weapons don't have to be feminine or masculine. He's just a master of all weapons. This man knows how to fire every single gun ever made of mankind. He has fired howitzers and missiles. He's shot shit out of ICBMs. He's shot shit out of submarines. He's driven in tanks. He's done all of it, and it's all photo documented. In Soviet Russia, President assassinate you, by the way. He's a master of all manly vehicles. If it's got wheels or wings or fins, this dude has driven it. That's him on a battleship. That's him on a speedboat. That's him in a single man, what do you call those things? It's like a hand glider with an engine. That's him in the middle picture in a submersible submarine. They went to the bottom of Lake Baikal. That's him also in an Indy sports car, on a motorcycle. I've seen him drive pickup trucks and tanks and semis. That's him in the cockpit of a fighter jet. This dude has done it all. And he's a master of all animals. He has had his picture taken with every animal that has graced the countryside or cityscapes of all Mother Russia. Remember when we used to have memes of this guy all the time and laugh because he was so funny, and now he's like a dictator. Vladimir Putin, horse whisperer. I've heard that he's even a horse whisperer to sharks, like a boss. This is a real picture, said no one. Okay, so Russian hero, conservative icon, by the way, conservative icon worldwide. You'll see a lot of American ultra-conservatives, probably a lot of the folks who stormed the Capitol a couple of years ago, who are Vladimir Putin fans, because he is an old-school traditionalist. Let's make Russia great again, like America's great again. And he did have a fast love recipient of Donald Trump. He's an idol of authoritarians worldwide because he's been such a success story. He's been in power for 25 years. And, as has been asked multiple times in this chat room, he has very high approval ratings. His approval ratings are only perhaps going down just now because of this war, and a lot of body bags are starting to be sent back to families in Russia. However, that might galvanize Russian people. Maybe, dead soldiers are making him more popular. It seems not, but throughout most of the last 25 years, he's had approval ratings easily over 60, 70, 80%. So authoritarians worldwide love this guy. They want to be him. They want to run their countries like him. So, and just 15 years of Putin, and this is a wicked old slide, from 1999 when he officially took over to 2013, and you could play it ahead 10 more years now, and all the numbers would still be going up. All of the numbers would still be going up, even despite this war. The numbers on things like national debt, pension distribution, average income, GDP, all these numbers would still be going up 10 years from this chart. But you can see 1999 to 2013, GDP went from 195 billion to over 2 trillion just in 15 years of him being in power. Much less standards of living went up, life expectancy went up. Well, maybe not that, because they do drink a lot of vodka. Everything got better in Russia in the first 15 years of him being in power, and mostly even in the subsequent 10 years. What he did overall is stabilized Russian economic chaos from previous decades, because the Soviet Union was imploding and going downhill economically, and then it went through a period of chaos even after the Soviet Union imploded. He settled that out, got Russia back on track. He restored Russian pride. He consolidated political power. He restored Russia as a world power player. Let me go through that list again. This is a slide that's now 10 years old. 10 years ago, I was given a lecture, and I was like, what this dude did in basically just a decade and a half, stabilize the economy, increase the economy, restored Russian personal pride. Personal. This is personal. National pride. We feel proud of our country again. Consolidated all political power to himself and restored Russia as a world power player. Etha said that was a great pairing on the Taco
I
Bell
was waiting for
and
that.
port wine.
I was waiting for someone to ask me about, did you get this one? It's so funny. I was just thinking that, like, did that person have
Back in the day, he has been Time Magazine's Man of the Year, I think, multiple times now, and might possibly be Man of the Century. Now, he won't win any Time Magazine awards from now on, since he invaded a sovereign state and is causing death and destruction. But before he did that, he was quite popular even on the world stage, even though many of us saw where this train was heading. But he still was a good guy for the first 15 years of his power. He might be Man of the Century when all is said and done. And it's because he's a living legend. Very rarely, I don't use those terms lightly. When we say Man of the Century, I'm not saying he's Man of the Century because he's a good man. I'm not saying he's the best Man of the Century. I'm saying he might possibly be Person of the Century for the impacts that this single individual has had on all things global. And he's not done yet. That's why it's rare that we talk about someone in this context of being a living legend. We usually reserve terms like legend and Person of the Century for dead people, because we can look back in hindsight and be like, wow, they affected so many things. They affected so much stuff in Russia, but they affected global politics and they affected global events. This single human has done that. I mean, even some of the more popular people you might love right now. So you might be a huge Donald Trump fan. Yeah, he'll be in the history books, but he hasn't affected world events that are going to have repercussions for decades to come, if not centuries to come. He has not reconsolidated and reformatted the concepts of sovereignty or even international power players or even allies and enemies. Vladimir Putin has done all these things that no single other living and even dead in the last 100 years politician has done. And he's not done yet. So these are characteristics that I implore you to think about critically, not good or bad, but the impact that individuals can have on global events and world history in general and our way of life. This guy's kind of big up there whether you like him or not. And now he's so powerful and confident enough perhaps to redraw the map of Europe, which is what we're seeing now. So what other maps is Putin looking at to define Europe and Russia? Well, I'll start with this one and I'll end with this one because we're already an hour and 20. And I know lots of you are like, I don't want to hear Boyer talk for any longer than this. But I had mentioned Kievan Rus earlier. I had talked about Vladimir the First, the Great Vladimir, as first leader of Kievan Rus. Okay, what the hell is that? Believe it or not, Vladimir Putin knows this map too. And it's one that has persisted tickling his brain since perhaps he was a KGB agent decades and decades ago. And this is actually the origin of the Russian state. The Kievan Rus, before we even, in history have people calling Russians Russians, before they were an ethnic group of name, of note, there was the Kievan Rus. And I'll go through the whole story of how this formed if you want a whole lecture just on Russia before this semester is done. But briefly, this is the area, you see, it kind of covers all of what we call Eastern Europe. Even over as far as perhaps almost Germany. And this is a long time ago. This is 880 AD. A conflagration of people from different parts of this area, of this part of Eurasia, that had come together, some from the north, some Scandinavians from the north, some Slavs from the south, that mixed, interbred, if you like, and over time became their own people with their own kind of culture and language. And the first Kievan Rus, the first time that starts to get identified by historians of their time, not our time, this loose federation of East Slavic tribes in Europe from the 9th to the mid-13th century. It is the first great political entity of Eastern Europe. So Vladimir, if you cherry pick history, which Vladimir does, he can go back and say, hey, look, Eastern Europe's ours. We were the first major empire there 1,000 years ago. And I don't know that that means they should get it back, but that is arguably true. And he bases a lot of his mindset, I think, and maybe other Russians do too, on, yes, this part of the world is kind of where we started, so therefore it's kind of ours. The modern peoples of the countries, sovereign states of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia all claim Kievan Rus as their cultural inheritance. All of them agree. We're all from this area. So I like to point this out because when you hear Vladimir Putin speak for the last several years, he has mentioned this many times, that we're all family. This is all family. That's why Belarus is basically translated as Little Russia, Little Rus. And I'm surprised they haven't reabsorbed Belarus, but we talked last week about why he hasn't done that yet. So Kievan Rus begins with the rule of Prince Oleg of Varangian, I'll tell you what that is later, which moved his capital from Novgorod to the more strategic city of Kiev. Kiev, isn't that the modern day capital of Ukraine? Yeah, it is. So again, there's a lot. This is the long story. Actually, I'm giving you the short version of the long story. But this gets back to what I told you. Vladimir the Great introduced Christianity to this kingdom with his own baptism. Yeah. And that's why I referenced him as the Great Vlad earlier. In their history, he still was a big one that helped form up early Russian culture that now is between lots of different groups. Now, Vladimir Putin truly, underlined, truly believes Ukraine is part of the family and that Mother Russia is the mother. This is from July 12th, 2021. I remember doing a podcast on this because it impressed me so much. I'm like, something's going on here. Why is he talking about this? This is a full year before they invaded. Well, less than a year. This article is written by Vladimir Putin. I can find it for you if you like, or just take it down, write down if you want to read the whole thing, if you're really into Russian history, write it down on the historic unity of Russians and Ukrainians, written by Vladimir Putin himself. Written by Vladimir Putin himself. I mean, maybe he had somebody write it for him, but he put his name on it. But by all accounts, he wrote it. Let's see. In this, some of the lines I pulled out. I said that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole. These words were not driven by some short-term consideration or prompted by the current political context. It is what I have said on numerous occasions and what I firmly believe. I therefore feel it necessary to explain my position in detail and share my assessment of today's situation. And then it was back in July of 2021. Pulling out another piece. Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians are all descendant of ancient Rus. Kievan Rus. Again, I keep stressing. Kiev is in modern-day Ukraine, which was the largest state in Europe. Again, these are Vladimir Putin's words. Slavic and other tribes across the vast territory, blah, 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 were bound together by one language, which we now refer to as Old Russian, economic ties, the rule of the princes of the Rurik dynasty, and, after the baptism of the Rus, the Orthodox faith. The Orthodox faith. The spiritual choice by Vladimir, Prince of Novgorod. Vladimir Putin is very adept at pulling out, cherry-picking history and reinforcing kind of the major themes and major figures that he is, again, cherry-picked, saying all the things I'm telling you reinforce that I am right and Ukraine is part of us and Ukrainians are Russians. And I love this from the New York Times right before the invasion last year. Pretty much this sums it up. Marry me or I'll kill you. And the Ukrainians were not having it. So that's where we are a year later. I showed you this slide earlier as well. Most recently, Putin has kind of seen himself as the new czar. So he has now pulled all power to himself. And for those of you that don't know this, the term czar, like Tsar Nicholas, the previous czar of Russia, is a translation from Caesar. It's a Russianized version of the word Caesar, or leader, or ultimate leader, penultimate leader, king, ultimate ruler. And so Vladimir Putin, in his entirety of being in office for 25 years, has worked behind the scenes and in front of the scenes in an effort to make himself a new czar. And most folks, I think even within Russia, kind of see him now as a new czar. They have elections, and they may have a Duma, which is the equivalent of our Congress, and people may go out and vote every now and again, but I think everybody knows this guy ain't going nowhere. He is the head honcho. He is he's the 21st century czar. And they ain't had one since they killed the last one in 1917. All of this is, again, he looks at himself as the true leader of the Russian people, as the leader of a third Rome on the rise, and I'll explain what that stuff means if you're interested in it. Putin now, as multiple occasions, talked about how the Russian Orthodox Church is kind of the only real Christianity left, that they are holding the line on conservative Christian values. So he sees himself now as even as a religious supporter, religious leader. The third Rome is in Moscow, and we are the last bastion of the true Christian faith. All of this is wrapped up with him as the leader of Russian national identity. And that's why I say he sees himself as the Slavic savior now. I'm the leader of the Slavic peoples worldwide, not the leader of Russia. I'm the leader of Russian peoples, and all other peoples who were from Kievan Rus are Russian people. So I am the leader of all of the Slavs worldwide. I am their savior. I have to come and take over their countries to save them from themselves. Okay, and that seems like a good place to cut. So he's a living legend, a Slavic savior. How the heck did he get this status in the mere 25 years he's been in power? Well, to understand this current Putin cult of personality mania, you have to put the context of Russian history, at least the part that Vlad pays attention to. And I've already now started to talk about a lot of this, but I think what we'll do next time is pick up with the Kievan Rus, and then run through the quick rise of Russian power, and then a more in-depth look at the leaders of the 20th century of Russia that led to Vladimir Putin, and perhaps even a little Cold War politics. If you all have specific questions you want folded into that next Monday, can you email those to me right now too? Meaning, do you understand enough about, say, the EU as a threat to Russia, or NATO as a threat to Russia, or World War II politics, or the Iron Curtain, or the Cold War? If these are all terms you're not sure you understand at all, hit me up right now and say, hey, can you actually cover some of that as you're talking about the rise of Vladimir Putin next week? Because I will give you a condensed lecture of this is the stuff that Vladimir Putin knows, and this is what's affecting his decisions, and this is what modern Russia is all about, particularly with their invasion of Ukraine. You do have to kind of know a little bit of that stuff in order to understand fully. So with that, are there any questions that I can finish up with right now? Is anybody going to help me make some test questions? And what else would you like to know for next week? You can send me an email, or you can do the chat room right now if there's anybody left. What else do you need to know as we wrap up the old Plaid Avenger Twitch cast for tonight? I love the sound of silence. Okay. That's okay. I'm not pressing. You don't have to make any comments. But without any more comments, I will go ahead and wrap up the old mailbag here. And we will see you. I can click back to this. Live big video. There we go. Okay. Nancy P22 says, can we cover the Cold War next week? You got it. I will do literally a 5 minutes of the growth of the Russian Empire. Hold me to 5. And then I'll start talking about the leaders of the 20th century Russian leaders that plays along with the whole Cold War. Because the Cold War was about the communist Ruskies versus the capitalist free world democracy Team West. And so it's hard to tease one out from the other. I kind of need to talk about the Russian leaders that were leading that at the same time as what those politics were all about during the Cold War. Awesome. Livia says, I would also like to know more about the Cold War. Awesome. I keep forgetting. You guys don't really learn that much about the Cold War anymore. It's such ancient history. It only affected the entire planet for 50 years and shaped the modern world. But yes, I guess we don't cover that stuff enough. And so, yeah, I will cover that. And I'll even get you a little bit ahead on NATO, because you have a whole big lecture on NATO coming like in a couple more weeks. But I can get to some of that now so you understand why Russia considers that a threat too. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I appreciate all the comments. I apologize to those who came here straight thinking that we were going to have a Putin lecture. I thought the same thing, but then there's so many good comments and so many good folks in here chatting. I can't ignore the chat room, especially when you're asking good questions and making great comments. So I love everybody that comes in here. I appreciate all your comments and your interactivity. I hope you like this format. If you like this format, please give me a shout out. If you'd like me to do more of these things, please give me a shout out. If you think you'd like to do me to do more of these things for the rest of your life, please give me a shout out. Katie keeps trying to get me to do a whole damn daily show on the Twitch, but I'm old and tired, but I'll try if enough people really want that. And Sergeant Gummy Bear says, thank you. I'd love to have another one this week. Next week, you got it. Do some more, please, from M. Wafer. Thank you. And have a great night. Email me anything you need to email me, and we'll pick up the story of Vladimir Putin and Russia next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, Monday at 8, if not sooner, but we'll definitely do it next Monday at 8. Party on, everybody.